Welcome to Universal God Message of Peace, and I am the Weissman, Lale Tunser. And we just finished, to be fair, we just finished a beautiful interview on the subject of the Holocaust. We thought it'd be appropriate to talk about empathy. Really, we talked about the Holocaust and dehumanization. So thought, what's the antidote to that? And figured the antidote to that is empathy. So thought that we would talk about that um, today. And I racked my brain trying to think of how to introduce this topic. So I'm just going to share one thing. You know, a few years ago, I was thumbing through a magazine, and in the magazine was a picture of a father in Afghanistan at the wedding of his daughter, and he was just hugging his daughter, just a guy and bearded guy, kind of a big black turban. Um, and he's hugging his daughter, and his daughter is looking at him, and he's looking at her. And I looked at that picture and I thought, that could be me and my daughter. I I saw myself in the picture. Now, there are a couple of reasons why I saw myself in the picture. One is because he was a bearded guy about my age. Okay, so already there was a sort of like there was something about him that kind of reminded me of me, right? And his daughter was about the same age as my daughter, and my daughter has curly hair, and his daughter had curly hair, and and that look in his face was the look of, oh my goodness, I love this kid so much and I'm so happy for her. And she is looking at her father like, she's looking at her father like, oh, I love him so much and I'm gonna have to leave my house and I don't know how to deal with it. And I'm imagining my daughter's wedding day and all this stuff, which hasn't yet come yet, but maybe one day soon, hopefully, please God. Um, Sorry, she said she's ain't gonna kill me. But um there was something about it. Like it was something ineffable that there's something about someone else that you look at them and you say like you just feel like like you know them, like, and I think that that's sort of the essence of empathy is an ability to sort of be able to put yourself into someone else's skin, to put yourself into someone else's experience. And so in my case, in that case that I described, there were things that about us that were similar. I guess we were both kind of like religious guys, both around the same age, both, got beards, both got daughters, well, lots of things. But the human experience is so common, right? We share so much as human beings. Just from at the very base level in terms of what we really care about. Everybody wants to be, what do we want? We want to be safe, right? We want to be loved, right? Um, um, we want to be healthy. We all have these we want to be mentally healthy and happy. But everybody wants the same thing. So here we are wanting the same things. And to me, that's kind of like the basis of empathy is the recognition that we are all having a common human experience. And those differences that we have are like 5%, like at the extremes. If I go like that guy in Afghanistan, right? He's all the way on the other side of the world, and I'm here in the United States. And the differences between us are probably, he tends to eat on the floor. I tend to eat on the table. Um, he eats primarily rice and meat. I eat primarily rice and meat too. So I guess we share a common diet. Share a common diet, but we have some differences, right? I'm Jewish and he's Muslim, which is not as different as you might think. But obviously we have differences are maybe 5%, 10%, 90% of our experience, 90% of our experience is the same. We care about our families, we care about our health, we care about being safe, and we care about finding, whatever little bit of joy and pleasure we can find in this world. So that's what I think empathy is.
That's very beautifully said. Thank you. So it's easy to empathize with people who are similar to us, and you obviously saw the similarity in this between you both, and that's what you said made you empathize. But how about empathizing with people who we think are different to us? How would you say we can empathize with those who we see as different to us? What would you advise?
I think you have to look beyond. I think you have to look beyond the surface. I think that very often when we see indifference is something which is very something which is very superficial. I mean, the color the color of our skin. If you spend a minute thinking about the people you come to realize that the color of a person's skin has very little to do with their character. It's almost obvious if you give it a 5 minute meditation, right? If you give it a 5 minute meditation, you realize that clearly, right, skin color has nothing to do with content of character or languages. There are people, you can say beautiful, wonderful things in any language. You can say horrible things in any language. There's no language that is not without its possibilities of good and bad. So I think part of it is just kind of skimming off the surface, of a human being to really, see the people who are in front of you. And maybe that means having a curiosity about people. Actually, we talked a little bit about this in the last hour in the interview, which I hope people will watch. Yeah, my mother, I have to tell these stories. And we used to get on the bus, and my mother would sit next to some lady, and by the end of the bus ride, my mother would know everything about them. My mother would find out how many children they had. She would find out, how many marriages and divorces and children and grandchildren. And she would know the person's entire history. Why? Because she had this curiosity. She was always curious about people and their stories. She really liked people and their stories. And once you know a person, right? I mean, once we know a person, when we see them beyond their facade, right? How they look, how they present themselves, whatever mask it is that they happen to be wearing that day, whether they're wearing their designer clothes or they're wearing their normal clothes, or whether they're wearing a uniform, or whether they're whatever it is, right? If we look beyond that to actually get to know the person and to understand their experience, I think we're always going to find more to empathize with, because our experiences are, that human experience. There's no person in the world, you know, there's no person in the world who hasn't suffered. There's no person in the world who hasn't had joy. There's no person in the world who doesn't struggle with themselves, right? There's no person in the world, who hasn't had to face, hasn't had to face obstacles. So we have an incredible amount in common. You take, if you went to the Mobutu Pygmies, in Congo, right? And you talked about what it means to make a living, and to survive. Well, it's going to be a very different conversation than if you're sitting in the pub, or sitting in the coffee house in Shrewsbury. But still, it's about the same topic, and you're still talking to a human being. And so you have to kind of look beyond all that stuff, look deeper, have a curiosity about people. And I think what you'll find is like there's a human being under there that's just just like you. I mean, in so many ways.
So you're saying we should look for that being inside others that is exactly like us. Is that what you're saying? In order to be able to empathize with them. Is
Yeah,
there
or
such a thing? Is there such a thing? Is it when you say the human being, what do you mean by the human
well,
being?
not exactly like us. I mean, because that's also part of the beauty of it. The beauty is that nobody's exactly like us, right? Everybody has a different face. There's no two faces exactly the same. Um, right?
Obviously, but yeah, there's obviously things that we like and dislike on the outside. You know, someone might like mint flavored chocolate and someone might like orange flavored chocolate. But I mean like deep within, beyond those layers, is there a place where we actually both or we all like the same thing? So for example, you mentioned, you know, everybody wants to feel safe, everybody wants to feel, you know, loved, and everybody wants to feel healthy, everybody wants to have enough, you know, not to struggle, not to suffer, not to experience pain,
Right,
things like those. Like
right.
my question is then, how would we know that we don't like to, that we want to feel safe? How will we know that we like to feel loved? And all of these emotions and desires, how will we know that and therefore seek it in someone else if we didn't experience the opposite? And then my next question is, why do we experience the opposite? Is it because we sinned, you know, in the Garden of Eden? Or, you know, is that why we have to suffer? Is that why we have to struggle? Is that why we have to experience pain and that type of thing? Um, and then my next question is, so in that case, if these are the ways that we learn empathy in order to be able to know each other better, then did we not know empathy in the Garden of Eden before our fall? Sorry, that's a bit deep.
Well, I'm gonna. Uh, I think of it like this. Okay. Instead of thinking of the world as being kind of a punishment, let's think of the world as being an education. Okay, this is our classroom, right?
Mhm.
Our classroom. And first of all, nobody gets away. Okay, when it comes to the opposite, okay, nobody gets away in this life without sometimes feeling unsafe. Nobody gets away in this life without feeling sometimes unloved. Nobody gets away in this life without feeling sometimes unhealthy. Okay, so suffering is part of the education of being in this world. It is. There's no way, there's right. And indeed, as you said, if we didn't have that suffering, right? If we didn't have that suffering, we wouldn't know what its opposite was, right? We wouldn't know what the light is without the darkness. We wouldn't know what it is to be loved unless we knew what it's not to be loved. So those things, that's part of the way the world was built. Now it's interesting. The story of the garden implies that, well, maybe there was a possibility that the world would be all good, right? They say, the Jewish stories, Midrashim say that even the trees in the Garden of Eden all have the same taste, right? If you had a mango tree, right, and you took a leaf of the mango tree, it tasted like mangoes. If you took the bark of the mango tree, it tasted like mango. Everything had the same taste. Everything was tasty, right? A whole world of tastiness, right? And tastiness and perfection and no difference, right? Because you only had two people who were really one person, right? Originally, there had been one person. He was kind of two. They're really one person, right? There's no difference, right? Says, but obviously, that's not the world ultimately that God wanted. The world that ultimately God wanted, okay, is the world that we have today, okay, in which there is a diversity of everything, right? I look out my window and there are 50 different kinds of birds and 5,000 different kinds of plants. That's just looking out one window, okay? And 5,000 different kinds of plants
Mhm.
and diversity of all kinds. If I look at the people walking down the street, some of them are white, some of them are black, some of them are brown, some of them have kinky hair, right? Some of them have kinky hair, some people have curly hair, some people have straight hair, some people have, right? They had curly hair in the morning and now they have straight hair, right? Right? This is there are people, right? Some have gray hair, right? They all have they're all different, and that's part and that's part of that's part of the deal. And it's part of the challenge, right? And I love particularly the Quran puts it in a beautiful way. A nice Jewish guy quoted the Quran, where the Quran says, I created the world with different people in it. And so that you should know each other, right? That you should know each other. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful mission statement, right? God clearly created the world with variety of things. And part of the challenge, and this is, I think, goes back to the idea of one God. Um, Part of the challenge is for us to be able to see the unity beneath the diversity, for us to be able to see the oneness that exists in the entire universe, that all of it is connected to each other, all of it is a reflection in some way of the Creator, and to be able ultimately to see the Creator in everything, right? Especially in each other, because we know that human beings are a special creation, right? God breathed into us, right? Breathed into us a special soul, so that inside of us, so to speak, right, is this breath of God, right?
No,
This very
it's the desire of our creator, really, that's the same within each one of us. And I think, on the external, we have our own desires and we have our own likes and dislikes. We have our, what we think we like, what we think we dislike. And that's okay. And that's beautiful. And it's, it creates diversity. And, if we can celebrate the diversity, that's amazing. But like you said, within all of that, within the layers, there is one desire, and that is the desire of our creator within each one of us. And what is this desire? So let's talk about that, because if we can connect to that place within each other, then how amazing would that be? Because then we can all sort of, yeah, like see that love within each other, and perhaps that can teach us to empathize more with one another despite our differences, and empathize even with those who look different on the outside. So, what is the desire of our creator? Maybe we should all be talking more about this. What does our creator, from an Abrahamic perspective, really want from us? Let's look at scripture. Let's look at the Quran. Let's look at the Torah, the Psalms of David. Look at the scriptures, and let's look at our own personal experiences, perhaps, and reflect, because it's all in there as well, isn't it?
well.
We can reflect on our personal experiences through our suffering, through all the negative experiences, and we can look at what we like and what we dislike and what we really, really want. What do we really, really want?
But
Beneath.
listen, that's so important. We always have this, love your neighbor as yourself. First, you have to know how do you love yourself, right? What is it that you really want? What is it you really care about? You know, is it, what's really going to make you happy, right? Is the Gucci bag really going to make you happy? No, about 5 minutes it will make you happy, right? Is 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 being loved by your family and being respected by your community, is that going to make you happy? Yeah, it's in a much more lasting way. But God invested us. I mean, God invested us with a spiritual dimension, right? I mean, a little piece of infinity, right? Inside this finite being, right? This finite being, this thing that I call me, right? Inside or animating this, right? Animating this and what this really is, right? Um, uh, is something which is ultimately infinite, right? Comes from God. You know, the Torah describes it as, and it's repeated in the Quran, that God breathes the soul into, right? God breathed the soul into man. Well, that means that something comes from inside God, so to speak, right? We don't understand what that means at all. We have no idea what that means, but it comes into man. So there's this bit of infinity in every single person. The smallest, most insignificant person that you know, right? The most flawed, right? The most flawed person you know, the most perfect person you know, the biggest, the smallest, the greatest, every single one of them has this absolutely pure, untouchable, eternal dimension inside of them. And that is just an amazing thing. And
Exactly. And they wouldn't exist if he didn't will them to exist. So
right,
the fact that they exist is evident. The fact that if there's somebody that you think that you don't like, the fact that God is choosing to make them exist is evidence that we should love them. Because if you love God and you love all that He chooses to exist and all that He desires to exist, He says, "Be, it is." It says that in the Quran, and if He wills it, it is. So if somebody is, then God wills that person to be, and surely we should love that.
listen, when I get annoyed with somebody, which I'm a human being, I get annoyed with people. Okay, when I get annoyed with people, what do I think to myself? I think to myself, Lee, God woke this guy up in the morning. Okay, God woke this guy up in the morning, and he decided that this world can't exist without that guy right there in this world. Okay. And not only that, he decided that that guy has to be in the same room with you, right? He decided that right, not only does that guy have to exist, okay, whether or not I think it's a good idea or not, I didn't get to vote, right? If he had asked me to vote that guy, maybe not. Okay. Okay, I didn't get to vote. And if I got to vote, I would probably say no. And if he had asked me, says, "Oh, should you put him in the same room with Lee Weissman?" I would say, "No, no, 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 no. Not a good idea. Not a good idea. Don't put him in the same room with Lee Weissman." But God thought it was a very good idea for him to be in the same room with me, okay? And for him to exist in the world, which means I got nothing to say, right? I got nothing to say except for me to figure out, okay, so we need to figure out what it is about this guy, okay, that the world needs, because the world clearly needs something from this guy,
And if
right?
you're in the same room with this guy, then there's something that you can learn from this guy, and there's
Mhm.
something that he or she can learn from you, or
Right?
he can learn from you. So I think if we see our experiences like that, we can learn from every experience, from every interaction with somebody else, no matter how different they are. If
Yeah.
anything, the more different they are, then the more we can learn from them. Because
Right. I mean,
can you learn
means
from
I
somebody?
got a thing with this person, right?
Mhm.
I have a thing with this person. There's something, you know, and especially if they have a thing with me, right? So that's even better, right? Then we have then he has to look at me and think, oh my God, then God must think he has to be in the world too. And so we have stuff with each other. So and so if we're in this classroom together, right? If we're put in this classroom together and here we are in this big world, in this big world together, that means we have to be learning things from each other. And I think that looking beneath the surface and really for that, I mean, it sounds hokey, I'm sorry to say this, but looking for the holiness inside of another person, I think is really, I think that's practical advice, actually. It sounds very kind of, it sounds very spiritual, but I don't, I,
And Yeah, I agree with you. And I think sometimes people don't see it within themselves. So they rely, or we should help each other see the holiness within one another. So, you know, how beautiful would that be? You know, if I might think I'm beyond hope, you know, I might be so into doing, you know, having bad habits that I might forget that I have the spark of God within me, just like everyone else does. And so I would really appreciate it if somebody loved me enough to, you know, listen to my story, to offer me a helping hand, a bit of empathy during a time of hardship. Um, and the spark of God that I see in them might help remind me that actually there's a bit of hope. Like I might have that within myself too. And
Yeah.
and so empathy is the most powerful tool to connect to people, to connect with our creator. And obviously, you know, if we had more empathy for each other, then perhaps we would not look down on each other. We would not we would want to learn from each other. We would be more humble, and um there wouldn't be so much war and that type of thing. But
I
my
think the
question
lack
is,
of empathy is really the cause of almost all cruelty, you
I think
know?
it is, yeah, because
Um,
it's the opposite of hatred, isn't it? And empathy brings, you know, love and goes against hatred. And I think we can hate what somebody might be doing, but I don't think we should ever hate the person. And because that then fuels arrogance, envy, cruelty, greed, lust,
all the bad stuff.
yeah, all the bad stuff.
All the
Um,
bad-
and actually, you know, I have a question. Can angels feel empathy?
Hold on, let me ask.
From your
Uh-huh.
understanding,
Uh, I don't know. I
how
mean, I
my
asked, but they didn't answer. I,
my question is using, like, I'm trying to think. This is how I ask questions, and I think, well, if angels, you know, if let's say if angels are made of light and they're like robots of God, you know, they just do whatever they're told, and we, on the other hand, we have free will, so we can, you know, choose to do something according to what we think is our desires. Da, da, da. Ultimately, everything is, you know, one with God. But um, if we can, what am I saying? So okay, so if there's free will, and if angels don't have free will, obviously empathy comes from the fact that free will exists. So how can angels feel empathy if they don't have free will? Because we feel
well,
empathy because we are able to do something
yeah, I
that's
think I think it's interesting. I mean, I, now that you mention it, I think it'd be very hard for angels to feel empathy for human beings. You have all these, it's interesting, all these stories about, at least in the Jewish literature, all these stories about how um, angels are a little hostile towards human beings, right? Because God has these spiritual, right? So the angels, let's say, are God's spiritual creatures, right?
Mhm.
And they do exactly what God wants. They, they don't, they don't have free will in that respect. And so they don't rebel, right? For the most part. Okay. They don't rebel and they're perfectly spiritual and they're not doing all the weird things that human beings are doing. And human beings are these like weird leather bags of pus, blood, urine, and bile. They're kind of smelly, and they're smelly and physical, and they do bad things. They're cruel and they're messed up. And God seems to really like them a lot, right? He gives them prophets and laws and these things. He seems to care about them. And the angels are like, you got us. Like, what do you need those smelly things for when you have us? Like, you know, and
Yeah, we
somehow or
praise you,
another,
glorify you. We sing your
right,
praises all day long. We don't.
we're 24 hours a day, whatever. And these people, they can barely schlep, every once in a while, they schlep in, they say a few words, whatever. And who knows if they even mean it. And I said, we really mean it. We're right here. We're great. Right. And so so they just kind of look and they just kind of look at us and say, these things are horrible. Like, why do you care about them? And so I guess, I think a lot of people look at other people like that, you know? I mean, there are people who sort of think of themselves as being like angels, right? They look at other people like, why would you care about them when you have a spiritual, awesome, amazing person like me? This is what was that? I saw a video the other day. Um, what did they call them? Um, uh, Oh yes, there were the people who lived on some commune, and then everything else was the the the, the death culture,
Mhm.
right? The death culture, So if there's me and I am like, I'm enlightened being or whatever, and everything else is the death culture, right? Why would you care about them? And I think part of the reason why we're told all this stuff about the angels is because we're not supposed to have that attitude. Because the point of the world is not to have perfect beings, right? The point of the world is not for us to be perfect or for the angels to be rejoicing in their perfection, but their perfection is almost is almost a deficit because it doesn't allow them to have empathy, right? They can't look at the rest of the world and relate to it because they feel like they're above it, so we shouldn't be like that. No, we shouldn't be.
Because to experience all the things that human beings, all the in this physical world, there's bloodshed, there's, like you said, there's urine and pus and all of these like
Yeah,
things
horrible stuff. Yeah.
dirty and disgusting and impure. So in the impurity of the physical world, um, how can one might think, well, how can the light of God be in those places? Um, but the human being was made from the dust of the earth and
Right.
part of who we are. And unless we accept that and actually gain wisdom from that, I just think first of all, why would we want to be like angels? Because God asked the angels to bow to Adam.
Right.
The way through if we have the potential to learn empathy and to show that empathy to others and to experience the mercy of our creator through empathy, then that brings us closer to God than angels can ever
Right.
really experience. Even though they are one with God and everything is one with God, we're all one with God. But in terms of our actual experience of reality and experience of his beautiful attributes, the human being has the ability to really experience that mercy of our
Right.
creator.
And we were all created as prime ministers, right?
Exactly. Got this responsibility.
Right. We're all prime ministers. It's like as you're looking out, right, as you're looking around the room, right, at that guy, you know, that same guy, that same guy who, right, the same guy you look at, he's a prime minister too, How can it be? Like, here we are, United Nations, right? He's a prime minister, he's a prime minister, he's prime minister, he's prime minister, right? So everybody here is an ambassador, right? Everybody here is an ambassador of God. Everybody here is a prime minister, right? We're all given this same job of, of taking care of this world, right? And so
And I think our job is to bring down the light into those places, really. Like, it's not to try and escape from it. You know, if we just lock ourselves up in our houses and keep everything pure all the time, then we're not sacrificing our purity in order to bring more light to the world. So my understanding is that you know, at the moment, that's how I understand it, that we have to sometimes be prepared to sacrifice our own purity in order to bring purity to others and to bring purity to impure places, really. And that involves sitting with the homeless, that involves sitting with the those who society might see as, you know, less worthy or valuable. You know, it involves trying to look at the other side and learning from that place.
and
And
they're
that
also prime ministers.
they are, and if
They're also
anything,
prime ministers.
yeah, if anything, um, there's a lot of value in the most hidden places, and the prayer of the oppressed is a very powerful thing, you know. Um, yeah, I think just
Not
because our brain tells us that something somebody or something is wrong or whatever, then we should be, you know, well, let's be, you know, bringing up a flag sign saying, no, wait a second, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the opposite is true. Maybe that is exactly the place that I need to go. And that's, I need to do the opposite of what my mind might be telling me.
But empathy really, just as a very practical, I always like to kind of try to, try to leave us with a practical thing we can do. So a very practical thing is just like listening to people's stories, right? To understand who a person is. So often we don't empathize with somebody because we just don't know them, you know, we've sort of formed an impression of them, based whenever what our prejudices are. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean just, of course, all of us, we build up our experiences, and our experiences, are shape the way that we see other people, right? And so, you see an elderly person, and we say, well, this is how elderly people are, right? And we see, and so forth. See a young person, this is how young people are, right? And instead to sort of see the person as they are, and and to get their story, and to allow ourselves to be able to enter into their world, um and then to see that their world and our world are not so different, and to see that there is that wonderful infinite being in there, that prime minister hiding, in the child, in the homeless, in the old person, in the person across the room who you're not so about, right? Um, in the checkout person in the supermarket, who was rude to you, and all those people. Everybody has their story. Everybody has their human experience, and everybody is trying hard to do their best. You know.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people don't want to spend time listening to somebody that might be moaning or complaining or whatever, because they feel that they pick up negative vibes and it drains them and it makes them feel tired. So they try to, and actually sometimes it is important to, you need to protect your own mental health and your own sanity, and not be around negativity too much, because it can drain you to the point where it has a negative impact on your ability to take care of your responsibilities and obligations. But we shouldn't completely avoid it. You know, we should still step into it and, you know, be there, because that person might, yes, they might give you a headache, but you listening to them might completely change their life. Yes,
Yes.
you go home with a headache, but they might go home. Yes, they might pick up your positive energy and drain you from your positive energy, and you might take on their negative energy, but they go home feeling like the burden's been lifted a little bit from their back. You might go home with a bit of an extra burden, but that is an act of sacrifice, and that is an act of love, and actually maybe by listening to them you could have learned something too. And
Always. Really
exactly.
always.
So it's not just that they benefit and you lose, because you actually benefit too. Yes, you might feel like you have a headache and you might feel like you've got a bit of more of a burden, but tomorrow's another day. And when you wake up, what you've listened to, all those words that you've carried, and you know, tomorrow's another day, and they will have a positive impact on your heart and on our hearts. I say our hearts, and it softens our hearts because we chose to sacrifice our time and our positive energy in order to make somebody else happy.
And you know, you also learn, you know, you can learn also to transform that negative energy, right? So it's not so, you know, it doesn't, you don't have to, you can carry it, you know, you can carry it lightly because you knew you took somebody else's load, you know, you took somebody else's load off them. And it's it's different when it's with you, right? It can also be much lighter. So I hope in the coming week we get to hear each other's stories, that we see each other as more human, that we see that beautiful divine soul that's in every person, that the prime minister that's sitting across from you all the time. You're always in the presence of the prime minister. Unbelievable. And I wish everybody a beautiful week, happy week, and Be'ezrat Hashem, inshallah, we will be back in the coming week.
Thank you. God bless you all. Thank you for listening, and shalom. Thank you.
Recording.